Welcome to the Hike Strong podcast. My name is Marcus Shapiro. I am a hiking, strength, and conditioning coach. And now we are going to listen to part 2 of my conversation with Chris, a former REI Guide of the Year and one of the people who helped shape what modern guiding looks like today. In this episode, we go deep into what really happens behind the curtain, the hours of unseen work that make your trips feel seamless, the reality of tipping culture and how it fails guides, what it takes to be truly exceptional guide, not just a strong hiker, but someone with a deep hospitality mindset, and why so many outdoor pros can't sustain this career, even though they're giving it everything they've got. It's honest, it's eye-opening, and I think I'll change how you see guided trips going forward. And now let's dive back into my conversation with Chris Anderson. In our previous conversation, he brought up kind of like an anecdote that illustrated kind of a disconnect between tipping a hostess or a waiter or something like that at a restaurant versus a guide. That was an analogy that made total sense in my head. I'm going to let you flesh that out. You know exactly what I'm saying. Yep. So take it away, man.
Yeah. So tipping is the norm in the guiding industry. And again, I think going back to the history of guiding, organizations are also able to rely on the fact that they could tell their employees that, hey, even though we're paying you a very minimal amount, you're going to subsidize your work, sometimes as much as half or more by the tips that you get from customers. But then, of course, the flip side of that coin is always sort of taboo to talk too much about tipping ever, especially in the service industry like this. And so everyone's been a little bit afraid to completely just outline it completely to customers, hint at it. Of course, it's optional. But ultimately, at the end of the day, organizations are already feeling like customers are stretched to pay $1,000 to $6,000 a person for the program that they're about to go on. And then, to talk too much about how they should be tipping 10 or 20% more of that price is just a little bit too much for them to risk. So what we see a lot is we societally just have a very conditioned to feel like that 15 to 20% tip on a restaurant bill is just habit, almost habitual. And of course it runs different for some people. What we've witnessed in the guiding industry is, there just seems to be a dollar amount limit that really hits in around the start of 4 figures, high 3 figures, anywhere between $800 and $1,000, that no matter how much someone's paid for a trip or how long they've spent or how much the guide has done, it just starts to feel, in a world where they aren't habitually used to tipping in this realm, starts to just feel like it's a lot of money and they shouldn't go above that. And I've just compared it. I've been on very high-end trips where we've taken very high-end clients to very high-end meals. And, those clients on $1,000 or a $2,000 dinner just don't even hesitate to put down $200 or $400 as a tip for someone's work for 2.5, 3 hours. But will often just habitually sort of cap a tip at $1,000 for the course of 6 or 7 days of caring for these folks in every way you can think of. So, and, I'm not here to necessarily say what the right number is, but I know that math doesn't add up. So then it just becomes a question of, if this becomes a key component that organizations have leveraged, it puts the guides in a really tough position because they feel like they have to absolutely jockey for every bit of additional income they can get via tipping. And of course, that causes them to go above and beyond and do extra in their job. But there's also just, everyone sort of knows that that's not an endless ceiling to where that can go to. And they also get frustrated when that's what the organization will kind of rely on to sort of pay them in a low manner, but then also aren't willing to be super open or rely on it from the customer or sort of almost demand it as a key part of the experience. So,
okay. From a pre-trip logistics and meal prep through grueling 14-hour hiking days to post-trip de-rig and report filing, what's the single most surprising or overlooked task that guests would never guess that guides handle?
I'd say there's a number of things that you put a lot of work into so the guests don't notice, as opposed to the things you put a lot of work into that the guests notice. And no guide is ever going to, a lot of it has to do with cleaning, organizing, preparing. It all happens behind the scenes. Oftentimes it happens when guests are doing something relaxing, fun, or sleeping. These are things that happen before the sun comes up, after the sun goes down. You need to really, truly care about the guest experience to try to eliminate the noise noise. It's sort of like, what you don't notice about a really good photograph is there's nothing in it that's distracting. There's no little light switch on the wall that shouldn't be there. There's no, line coming into somebody's head. And it's because the photographer has either framed it that way or edited it that way. But most people don't understand that an amazing photograph often has things removed from it so that they're not distracting. And I would say that guides go to an intense amount of work to remove those things. And it's something as simple as, like clearing paths around a campground from little bits of trash or debris so that they're pleasing, stacking firewood at night so that it just looks good in the morning. Cleaning out the van every evening or sweeping it out so that it doesn't, start to pile up and notice. Restacking snack baskets, noticing that a client just mentioned something about preferring peanut M&Ms and going out to the store that night to go grab them instead of the regular M&Ms that are in the packet. Sometimes they're more heroic, like we go to some backcountry campsites sort of have their own very, very primitive backcountry toilet. And a guide will often make sure that they go there first with some good gloves and sanitation supplies to clean that up because it's often not left in good shape from the people before them. So it's a lot about removing obstacles before they're even seen. And it's one thing as a guide to be reactive to your customers' requests, but it's another thing to have done this so long that you already know what requests they're going to have, or even better, what requests they're almost too embarrassed to say because they don't need the van floor a little bit cleaner when they hop in every morning, but they sure do enjoy it when they look at a spotless van every night. So there's an unsaid amount of work that goes in while the one hand is doing all the flashy stuff, right? Taking care of medical needs, giving great interpretation about the environment, leading people on adventures every day. But it's really the other hand that's making sure that nothing is too distracting from this experience that I would say is the unsung part of what guides do. And it's all behind the scenes. It's the moment when guests are dipping their feet in the creek or taking a break or drinking water. The water jug is never empty. The snack basket is never empty. The food's always prepared. They never run out, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And you had mentioned to me before that one of the staff will book the lodging and the restaurants ahead of time, yet the guides will call the lodge and find out which rooms the guests are staying and then try to position them in a room that has the best view or...
Yeah, the right table in the dining room, because either you know that it has the best view or honestly, you get to know the servers and you know that Marsha's better than John. And if Marsha's working that night, can we be sat in her section? And this is the art of true hospitality. And I think that's a word that we use a lot. And so much of it is unseen. And, guides are not going to do a song and dance and say, hey, look how clean I made the van. Or did you notice that I got you the table by the window? It's all just seamless, but all that work is being done behind the scenes. And if anyone were sat in a table with a poor server, there's not a single person that would blame the guide. Like there's no repercussion. It's only upside and it's hidden upside. And it gets to the core of ultimately my hiring practices over the last decade. I got 1 million people that can hike to the top of the mountain, but there's only 1% of those people that want to put that kind of effort into making someone's experience. And that's a whole different skill set to identify, right? Because you have to want to do that. Because again, you're not standing on a table at the end of the trip and listing all these things you did for these people, so they'll tip you really well. You just sort of hope that at the end of it, they almost kind of look back and go, wow, I just had one of the more magical experiences of my life. And often they'll credit it to the environment and always to the guide. The guides were amazing, but I think it's even subconscious maybe where most of the work was going, not even on the conscious side.
Well, as former Guide of the Year, you helped define the awards criteria within REI. So beyond technical skill and personality, what tangible qualities separate a great guide from a truly unforgettable one? I think you kind of covered that, but there's anything else you want to flesh out?
Yeah. It really is that, you have to have a base level of competence to be able to take people out in the outdoors and be accountable for them. But that really is what we have found the easiest skill to find, identify, and honestly get out there. I developed a long time ago sort of a training methodology that really has to do with identifying those people. There's other books written about it, but identifying the person that's willing to make the customer the hero in their own story. Donald Miller, he started something called Story Brand and wrote a book called Story Brand, and 100% stolen from him this idea of winning in customer service by making the customer the hero. And he uses this definition of hero versus guide, and it happens to fit well because our guides are actually guides. But the archetype or hero in the story doesn't gel well with other heroes. They often need a guide in the stereotypical journey, in the stereotypical story. And where guides will go wrong with customers is they're also trying to be the hero. So if they're out there to log a ton of miles in amazing places at breakneck speed and be this hero type personality, they're going to clash with the customers. And so The most important attribute that we can identify, hire for, train for, and continue to develop, and then ultimately recognize is this idea that someone wants deepest at their core to provide an amazing experience for this customer, and they will do whatever it takes to create that. They'll do whatever it takes to continue to improve their own skill set to do it. And that's really actually the part of the job that feeds them. We said it in hiring all the time. If you're in this job to be outdoors, if you're in this job to see these places or to hike or to paddle or to whatever, like you will get tired of it because these folks are going to the same places, doing the same thing at a quarter of the pace they could do it on their own. It's really just a customer service and hospitality job, and it happens to take place outdoors. And of course, there's a certain skill set that needs to go along with that. But ultimately, you're hunting out those people that really are fueled by making an experience just a little bit better for somebody in any way that they can. And with REI and AOA, the wide gamut of trips that we would run means, sometimes that's a little bit more straightforward labor type work of helping someone set up a tent or helping carry their weight because they're having some trouble that day, to some of the way less obvious and more higher end, hospitality type stuff like you and I talked about, learning the servers in the restaurant, learning the best tables, learning the best rooms, those kind of things. But it's a pretty wide variety there. So in our Guide of the Year award, it was a lot based on customer reviews and peer reviews at various times, right? And those peer reviews and guest reviews that are above and beyond are never about how the person hiked or carried a pack or, it was about the amazing human that they experienced on this. And it was often because that human chose to look beyond what the customer ever thought that a guide was capable of looking to and solving these types of problems before the customer even knew they were going to be there. Or solving that kind of thing for your peers, and being that type of person who is just fueled by making, lifting everything up around you in various ways.
Well, you just humbly described yourself without doing it intentionally. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks should know that when my children were really young, my wife and I we actually booked a couple AOA adventures. One was to Havasupai, and the other one was it was in Utah. I believe we did like some Slack Canyons, Peekaboo and Spooky, and, some other things. And so, of course, we had the opportunity to get to know you, and our kids had an absolute blast. And I think that's something else that maybe parents don't realize about a good guide is that maybe you didn't realize you did it, but, you kind of took away the responsibilities from Pam and I, and you were able to entertain the children, and we were able to watch them, through their eyes, you facilitating it. And I can remember that as being, real special. So that was cool.
Yeah. Well, again, that would be a whole separate skill set. And certain guides really want to be that for kids and families, and some don't. But you identify those guides that are really into that. And then that becomes probably, like you said, one of the key things you could do in our family programming is engage the kids for their own sake, but, engage the kids for the parents' sake too, because then it becomes a win-win for all. The kids don't want to feel like they were drug along an adult trip, and parents are very used to kind of sacrificing their own experience for the sake of the kids. And man, if you can accomplish both, you've won, right?
I think that was probably about 12 years ago. Wow. Right now my kids are in college, and now they're home for the summer, and wow, time flies. So under the ADA rules, outfitters can't pre-screen medical conditions too aggressively from what we discussed. But guides often discover undisclosed health issues in the field. So how do the guides navigate that?
Yeah, so our guides were all trained at a very high, they're all wilderness first responders in the multi-day programming and wilderness first aid certified in the day programming. And so they're trained to understand a basic level of some of the more common things that they might see. And they're really asked to do two fundamental things when it comes to the programming. One is at the very start, they're sort of our last line of the customer vetting. It doesn't probably seem like it to most customers, but when you show up for the program, your guide is probably the first thing they're thinking about when they're meeting the group is the group dynamics. And it's everything from personality to health concerns and conditions, because that's, ultimately how the group gets along, both physically and emotionally and mentally. That's really going to make or break the program. And that's often the hardest thing to deal with in any program. It's not the weather, it's not the logistics of the trip. It's really this group that you're meeting. So They're trained to beforehand, they look at all the paperwork, anything that's been disclosed by the customers, and then also try to just assess what's going on, either visually, what's going on with someone, but often in, those first group meetups of some kind, they'll be asking the folks to kind of speak with them about any new or undisclosed medical stuff. And what we find as a trend is customers will often tell the minimal possible to the screening person on the phone because they don't want to scare anybody who they feel like could hold the keys to whether or not they can sign up for the program or not. And then they divulge quite a bit more to the person who sort of actually has their safety in their hands when they're going out on the program. So guides will often get the larger brunt of whatever's happening or, completely for no nefarious reason. Oftentimes customers will sign up for trips 3 to 10 months ahead of time. So things change as well. And customers don't always just think, hey, I'm going to call REI and let them know about my new diagnosis or this new medication that I'm on. And so guides have to become these sort of wizards of, in the moment, trying to assess what they understand, what they know, what they don't know, and everything from musculoskeletal stuff that might be a little bit more obvious to like, what are some of the contraindications for various medications? And does this type of common medication expose you to easier sunburn and sun damage or quicker dehydration? Or how is it going to interact with, or are we going to elevation on this program? And what medications am I aware of that, make you more susceptible to various elevation sickness and things like that? So guides are that last line of defense. But of course, they're not in a very good position to do anything but try to make it work. And that's what everyone is going to try to do. In some of the grossest of scenarios, they may ask or tell somebody that because of what they now know or what they've now learned, they can't go on the program. But that's very rare and would have to be pretty obvious or something major. But they do have that ability. But most of the time, what it just means is they're sort of quickly making a game plan based on what they now know and, where they're going to utilize the number of guides they have on the program, how they're going to work within the trip logistics and the itinerary to try to make it work for what they've learned. And so they play a really critical role in that safety piece. And it's not more common to be dealing with that type of thing. I would easily say that the number of incidents that we have had on programs, I would say it's over 50% that come from pre-existing issues that turn into something on the trail, more so than just random acts of nature that happen on the trail. So it's a significant part of what the guides deal with and what they're learned or what they're, used to preparing for.
In our previous conversation, you estimate that 30 to 50% of clients arrive undertrained. How do underprepared guests alter group dynamics and trip safety? And would you encourage adventurers to consider when booking a challenging trip?
Yeah. I think to clarify that number, I would say on the higher percentage, it's more people that are underprepared for having as good a time as they could have, not necessarily causing a safety issue. But if they were better prepared physically, they would either get to experience more of the program. So guides always have other things in their back pocket, whether it's a side hike to see something, whether it's, we could do this harder trail or this easier trail or this longer trail. So the more prepared you are personally, the more likely it is that the guide's going to pull you aside and go, hey, yeah, we're going to take the extra mile loop to this hidden waterfall because I know you got it in you. Or on our rest day, instead of recommending we go down to the local artisanal shop, I'm going to recommend we go hike to see this thing or whatever. So, and or just the amount you can enjoy the scenery, hiking out of the bottom of the Grand Canyon versus just wondering if you're going to make it or not and struggling along is the difference between how well you trained and are prepared for it. On the lower end, we actually do have this kind of sliding scale of the slower you pace or the more you struggle or the more individual attention that you need, especially that is sort of undisclosed to us ahead of time. We're left with the guide staff that we have and we stick within our ratios. But ideally, common-ish, 2 to 10 ratio where you would have 2 guides to 10 clients just on a big global average. Ideally, you would like each guide to be able to interact with and help and support and talk to and interpret for about 5 people. But in reality, if you have someone who is woefully unprepared for the program, it means that you have a 1-to-1 ratio for every day on the trail or on the water. And then that other guide is now helping out those other 9. And so that ratio just becomes out of whack a little bit. And in most cases, from our perspective, from a risk management perspective at REI, we designed programs to fit the widest reasonable range of activities on the same trip, with a few exceptions of some programs that we specifically outlined as considerably harder or only for a select group of fit individuals. But otherwise, what the guides have to play with is they have the itinerary, they have a portion of backpacking for the day that for most groups will take 6 hours. So if they have to take 12, they still can, and they can still make it within the daylight hours. So there's a lot of flexibility. The key for us from a risk management perspective was to not bookend these guides by the schedule in a way that makes differing ability levels a real true safety risk. But it does mean that guides are always having to make a choice. And it's, do we keep the entire group at the pace or the ability level of the slowest person? Do we split the group up? Do we bring that first group ahead? And all of them have their own pros and cons. And those conversations are being weighed every single day. At the very least, you just get a group that doesn't quite get as much personalized experience because that you now have that one group of 1-to-9 ratio and that one group of 1-to-1. But at its most detrimental, you actually can run into a safety situation that was meant to be avoided by having multiple guides, multiple group members together because of the decision you had to make. You were forced into it. And these are decisions guides make all the time because of things that are unexpected that happen. Someone actually gets hurt on the trail or the program, but it becomes increasingly frustrating for the guides, especially when it feels like this thing could have been avoided ahead of time when customers just come to a program knowing that they're not, really prepared in the way that not only they should be, but that they were specifically given some of the tools to do it, or at least the information to understand that this is the requirement for the trip.
Okay, interesting. So after decades in the field, what's one recurring gripe guides say about clientele, operations, or industry norms? One that if solved would elevate average guide morale.
I mean, the biggest gripe just out there is pay. I mean, that's the biggest one. It's because the norm out there is guides are often paid at a day rate. Human nature, it's you don't look at an easy day and go, oh man, I really got paid a great rate today. You look at a hard day and go, man, I really didn't get paid for what I should have. Guides should work a 12 to 16 hour day, but there are 30-hour days. There are 35-hour days. There are days that don't stop because of safety. Somebody needs something. That's just the reality of it. And then, the larger piece of pay just being the lifestyle and benefits. Even if guides are getting decent pay on the job, it's often because they're getting paid while they're working and they're getting tips. So if they can't work because they have a medical issue, then they're not getting paid at all. That's also the norm. And so guiding already can be prone to taking a toll on guides' bodies, but especially if they're in a pay situation that they don't feel supported in taking the time off or getting the medical help that they need, then it's compounded, right? And then it's related to pay, I would say. Another just big gripe is that most jobs, they're only reliable for a season or two at a time. And it's not like it's a surprise. It's mostly seasonal work out there because of the nature of the industry. So guides really can't. They have to do a lot of backflips to put together year-round work and make something work that actually gives them a lifestyle and gives them, something beyond that season or beyond that year. And then just, I guess, from a tighter logistics standpoint, I think that piece, our biggest gripe that we heard about was this undisclosed, medical information piece. And you had alluded to it in the question, but there's only so much we can do on the phone with unvolunteered information from, customers that are calling up and interested in a trip. We try to prompt all of the right type of medical questions and all of the right scenarios to try to get people to kind of volunteer. And many people do. They volunteer enough information where they, our customer service specialists can help them decide that this trip probably isn't right for them. And we hopefully try to get them on a different trip or something that's a little bit better fit for them. And that happens all the time. But there are plenty of other situations where a customer's primary focus is just getting on the program. So they say whatever they need to or don't say whatever they need to. And then it becomes truly their guide's burden when they're on that program. There's a lot of frustration there. We tried to solve it mostly through education. Just the last couple of years, we had built an entire guide education program just centered on the customer screening process and what we as an organization can and can't do and their role in it. And so that they kind of understood that we were not in a position from a customer service perspective to just decide that someone is medically unable to take part in a program, that if the customer couldn't really decide that on their own, that it would have to then go to the guide level of making that final call. But that was probably the biggest gripe, is that every time something was divulged on a program from a customer that it felt to them like we could have known about earlier. Because to clarify, I would say 99% of those, the guide would never have said, so this person shouldn't have been allowed on this program. They just would have liked to prepare differently. They would have liked to know about this. They might have made some itinerary changes. In most severe cases, sometimes when we know about this stuff ahead of time, we add more guides to the program that are normally necessary just to make a better program for the customers. So there's lots of things to do that don't just equate to, you shouldn't have let this person on the program. It's just frustration that, they had to be surprised by it when they're 12 miles into the backcountry, right? Oh, you have epilepsy. Great. Let's figure this out, or whatever the case is, In
a parallel universe, I'd like to start an adventure travel company where you run trips that nobody's prepared for. But you have to train for it. So it's taking,
Ooh,
so you've got this whole pre-departure journey where you have to train. So part of it is the training, okay? And then you step onto that trailhead and you're like, okay, here we go. I am about to push myself beyond limits.
Yeah, I know I trained for something. I don't know what, but here we are.
Yeah, and I think obviously companies offer itineraries that have that, but just the whole ethos of it is from the very beginning. It's like, you just know when you're going to do this, it's going to be hard. And you're going to have to prepare for it.
Yeah.
Like it's non-negotiable. Like you just have to prepare for it.
I was just say, as a total non-podcast side note, I'm sure you're aware of the company Mountain Travel Sobeck, but you might not be aware that in the 50s and 60s, when they were first starting up, they would run occasional first descent of river trips in South America with clients. So you talk about, and I've talked to some of these clients, these just badass 80, 90-year-old women that I got to meet at like a Mountain Travel Sobeck 50th anniversary party in San Fran. And this woman was hilarious because she was basically talking about how all guided trip customers these days are weak because they just go on these like 4-star raft trips that everyone sets up for them. But she's telling me some of these stories and I'm like, the mindset of being a guide and taking clients, but it's a true first descent of a river in South America is just wild to me, just like different time, different people, and of course, different setup. The setup is you were getting a group of hardcore people together, and just because some were the guides and some were the clients, it didn't really change what anybody did because nobody really knew more than the other. They were just all in it together, but they called it a trip. But man, just a wild thought.
Well, I think I recall like when I got into this industry, and I started in 2009, but I started researching the whole Fit for Trips concept I started back in 2006. And so I remember looking into Mountain Travel Sobeck, and I think now they're MT Sobeck, but now they're going back to Mountain Travel Sobeck. I remember seeing like old 70s washed out pictures, or maybe it was 60s. I don't know, I think Richard Bangs was one of the guys or something like that, in their little shorty shorts with no shirt on and just like beards and whatever. And this is them going down rivers that have never been rafted before. And I guess that was pre-MT Mount Travel Sobeck or anyway, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, definitely pioneers. Yeah. And I did talk to Brian the other day.
Yeah.
We actually did I did kind of some interviews with him to try to understand how this hiking fitness software that we're starting to develop could potentially, be leveraged by the adventure travel industry. So anyway, we talked to Brian and stuff.
Nice.
And so, look, I have tons more questions. I think we're going to wrap it up. I think we did a great job. So I hope people come away from it understanding, a little more empathetic about the guide scenario. And perhaps, the next time someone is out on one of these adventures, they think back to this episode, treat the guides, with a little more, I don't know if respect's the right word, but just kind of empathy or at least understanding what they're going through and trying to help them have the best experience. And, maybe they'll up their tip percentage a little bit. I think it might have that impact. And I think everybody's interested in the REI story.
Yeah, I think it's worth customers asking some questions about, there's great guides in every corner of the country and the planet and working for great companies and horrible companies and mom and pops and everything in between. They're going to experience amazing guides out there. It's just a matter of how long that guides can sustain their lifestyle there, what they're forfeiting in order to do that and provide that amazing experience for people. And I think in Americans, we need to just ask some more questions about how our guides are being paid. And when you have that experience where this amazing human just made things seamless for you and your family, like you said, thinking about what all went into that. And that's kind of the mission I'm on.
All right. Well, super. Well, anyway, that was awesome, Chris. Took a while to track you down. Okay.
Yeah.
But well worth it, and I appreciate it. We'll stay in touch, and I'll look forward in the future what the former REI Guide of the Year is doing. So if anyone's listening to this guy's up for hire, and so is his wife. They're awesome. They're awesome. So anyway, we'll leave it at that.
All right.
Chris,
thanks, Marcus.
Good to
Appreciate
see you.
having me on.
All right. Bye-bye. That concludes this episode of the Hike Strong podcast. I'm committed to keeping all of the episodes for free. All I ask is that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends. My goal is to build a vast community of hikers with the confidence to crush any local or global trail. I hope you will join me in this endeavor. So until next time, train, hike, repeat, and as always, I'm here to support you every step of the way.